Thank you for staying with us. As we near the end of January, things are starting to look up, at least look hopeful for the rest of the year, especially when it comes to travel.
Thank God. Now joining us with an update on some new travel rules due to come into effect next week and how they will affect our holidays moving forward is travel expert Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, I'm so happy to see you today. Tell us some good news, please. What's the lay of the land at the moment?
The sun is shining and the sand is still white everywhere we want to go. The lay of the land is that the Big Friday change didn't affect travel. Travel is more or less as it was, has been sitting since last July. Good, strong inventory, lots of choice in there for the summer. Ryanair made a big announcement. We will have more routes out of Dublin 2022 than we did in 2019. Cork, not as good. They had 50, they're down to 35, but it's Shannon, much the same. So lots of choice, but the seats have yet to be sold, obviously. If the take-up in those bookings isn't strong, some of those could be pared back. But what we've seen since Friday is a great deal of optimism, and people, liberated at home, now beginning to think of travelling abroad. And the complications, well, you can talk them up and say there are a lot of complications. If you're staying within the European Union, it's pretty simple now.
Pretty straightforward, really. I mean, tell us about the EU Digital COVID Cert now. It's limited to 9 months now. Anyone who's gotten boosted, should they all have it by now?
They're changing on Tuesday, February the 1st, and this is important. They won't look for the booster from February the 1st. They will look for it if it's, as you say, 9 months from the second vaccination. Most Irish people, we got vaccinated around July, so around Patrick's Day it'll kick in as a requirement. But the old Digital COVID Cert, by the time the summer comes around, they will seek that third vaccine, what we call the booster, what the politicians call the third vaccine. That happened because countries started putting their own sell-by date on it. Some of them put 6 months, some of them put 9 months, Czech Republic, Austria, and the European Union decided in December they were going to have a Europe-wide policy. And the success of last summer has been, instead of what happened in March 2020, everyone going their own way, there is a central policy. Now, there are a couple of little things to watch. If you're travelling immediately, there are 3 countries that still require a test. It's an antigen test before you travel, even if you have the Digital COVID Cert, and they're important. Portugal is our second biggest holiday market after Spain. Spain doesn't require it, Portugal does. Italy requires it, and Greece requires it. Likely that'll all be cleared up in the coming weeks, but if you're travelling now, just have a little check on that and make sure that it's up to date. And the Reopen EU app and the Reopen EU website, that is the official European Union one, where all the information is updated for all the European countries. Country by country, it's quite complicated if you just Google, because all sorts of people come up trying to sell you things. But if you go to the official European Union, that'll have.
What's the feeling on within the industry in terms of, because as you mentioned earlier on, some of those seats that are going to be available might be taken up because there are case numbers that are still high across Europe. Is it too early to tell yet whether there's going to be a decent take-up on the offers and seats?
Absolutely important, because it's not the medical advisors, it's not the airlines, it's not the people running the commercial, the tourist boards who'll decide we'll travel again. It's the consumer, and there's a good deal of resistance to travel. A lot of people, still saying, are we moving too fast? What are the case numbers right across Europe? And the European map, the little bits of green, the last bits of green were in Romania, have all disappeared as cases go high. It's the same debate in every country. I've just got back in from Spain last week. The same debate. The case numbers are running at a level that would have caused absolute panic even 6 months ago or a year ago. But because the hospital systems, they're under a little bit of pressure, but they're not at this getting swamped as everyone feared, and everyone is progressing. The debate on travel has changed as well. There was a tendency for people to, when there were, politicians, when the case numbers were high and they were looking for things to do, to say, well, what are you going to do about it? We'll stop travel. Travel hasn't been a contributor to high case levels. The places that people go on holidays are not where you find the high case numbers. They tend to be suburbs of cities. So that debate, which was raging in this studio and other places this time last year, has gone away. There is an acceptance that travel is not going to make any difference to your case
I
numbers.
thought the Canaries were after getting quite a battering recently with the COVID numbers, and that's quite the hotspot for international tourism, particularly from people from Ireland.
Canaries numbers went up from where they were, but they're not high in the terms
They
of
did put some restrictions back in, didn't they?
Tenerife put restrictions
Yeah.
in. And it's a point that you've got to remember as well, that, for instance, the Tenerife is at level 4. Gran Canaria and Lanzarote are level 3. Barcelona is a higher level than Madrid.
Yeah.
So local restrictions are going to be important. Portugal is quite strict on the digital COVID certificate at the moment. You need it to get nearly everywhere. There are people coming back saying they couldn't get to events because of the digital COVID cert. You can't, at the moment, getting on a ski lift, you'll need your digital COVID cert with your famous QR code. So while last Friday has lifted the restriction that we don't need it to get into restaurants at home, make sure that you bring it with you, because local restrictions will vary from region to region, and you could end up in Spain in a municipality which is a different restriction from the one down the road.
So you'd have to do your homework before you go anywhere.
It's not really that you have to be on top of every clause of every law. It's just once you have that digital COVID cert with the proof of your vaccination and your ID with you, that'll pretty much get you. Means you can move around. Without it, moving around is difficult. There are people who can't take a vaccine, and they'll need, the documentation that they have with it to explain that will generally work, and a COVID recovery cert. It's a little bit more complicated because very often it's not legislated for, but people at airline gates are letting you through, and people in local events are letting you through.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems that people face is, as the world reopens, we'll go, right, I'm going to go away on the holidays. Where's my passport? Oh, there it is. It's out of date.
And you won't get it for 6 months.
And there's a backlog of over 110,000. Where are we at that? Are the government putting steps in place to try and ease that backlog?
There is an emergency facility, but you really need to know that you really need to know early enough to even start getting the emergency facility in place. What they're putting out are dates which say are generally 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Most of the people who are in trouble that I know, and I'm coming across cases every day, have managed to get it in ahead of that. It's a problem for a family member, passport out of date, when you've got the old Home Alone scenario, we let's count the passports. But it's also a problem for newborn children. And the important advice there is you don't need to wait, for instance, for the PPS number. Go as soon as your baby is born, go for the passport. And they will get the support documentation involves sending the parents' passport. So getting all the support documentation back is pretty important as well, in time. So it is a little bit of slower than it was. My experience is the performance of the passport office is slightly ahead time-wise of what the expectation date. And it's got to be said, the tracking facility, the fact that you can watch what state it's at, where it is.
And you can do it online. You don't have to go in anymore. That's fantastic.
It's so much easier than queuing up in the passport
You've
office.
gone to people that actually missed their holiday. My sister and my niece missed their holidays to Mauritius to see in-laws before Christmas. It was great.
Owen, thank you so
Thanks
much for
a
coming
million,
in.
Owen.
Always a great pleasure.
Happy your time.